This is The Surge, a new action RPG developed by Deck 13 and published by Focus Home Interactive. Recently, Deck 13 sent over a demo of The Surge and I was able to play the first few hours of the game. And the elevator pitch of The Surge would sound something like, it's Dark Souls combat combined with the targeting VAT system of Fallout and then placed in the sci-fi world similar to look and tone of Elysium. And that is the game in a nutshell. It has tight, weighted, and fluid combat where armored and unarmored body parts can be targeted to then be severed for gear collection. And this is, of course, all set in a dystopian future where cybernetic implants alter your abilities and the mechanical exoskeleton rigged to your body allows for superhuman capabilities. But that's enough of the broad strokes though. Let's jump into the nitty-gritty. Let's discuss 10 things that you need to know about The Surge. At first glance, The Surge definitely gives off a vibe of Dark Souls combat with a sci-fi skin slapped on it. But what makes The Surge interesting? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what The Surge does to stand apart from similar games and how it innovates over the titles that helped inspire it. First and foremost is definitely Surge's targeting system. Unlike many other third-person melee-centric action games where you can only lock onto the target's center mass, The Surge allows you to target a single foe in different locations. For instance, on these enemies you're able to target the body, head, each individual arm, and each leg individually as well. And why do we care about body part targeting? Well, for many reasons, but most importantly is the targeting system allows an added layer of depth to the combat. Some enemies will have armor equipped to specific limbs. Unarmored appendages take significantly more damage than armored counterparts. Additionally, and this brings us to our next topic, targeting a specific limb and then performing an execution will sever that body part. To perform an execution, you have to build up enough energy via combat, which will then begin to drain after combat subsides. But not only does an execution go into a badass little cinematic slow motion kill move, but also the gear attached to the body part that's being severed can then be looted. In other words, that dude with that weapon you want? Chop it off, and now it's yours. That body armor, cut him in half and wear it. I really like that helmet, but I think it would look better on me. These executions as a means to equip your character and the pace at which you can obtain new gear really lends to a great sense of progression and a steady sense of reward. And I definitely loved it. It was awesome. Alright, so let's talk about combat. Instead of having strong and weak attacks as most games like this are accustomed, in The Surge you have horizontal and vertical attacks. There's also stamina management for dodging and attacking, and for the most part, any game partially inspired by Souls, combat is about watching for tells from your enemy, dodging at the right moment, and attacking when opportunity presents itself. For the most part though, combat is about weighted movements and attacks, but more than anything in The Surge, it's about chopping enemies up for their gear. Alright, since we're on the topic of chopping enemies up, let's dive into that a bit. First off, I really like the fact that in the same way you can target each limb of an enemy separately, you can equip gear to slots in the same way, meaning you can choose what you want to wear on your chest, your head, and each individual arm and leg, as well as a weapon. Overall though, the way you equip this gear is very streamlined. None of the gear has stat requirements, instead each piece takes a certain amount of energy from your rig. Meaning you can't wear all heavy gear until you level up your rig enough to support all the energy requirements needed to run it, and lighter gear takes less energy to run. Also, wearing a full set will give you unique bonuses to facilitate slightly different playstyles. For example, the lightweight Link set has less stamina consumption and better dodging capabilities, but the Rhino has better defense and stopping power with your weapons. To that end, since there's no stat customization like dexterity or strength to define your character, it's more like Monster Hunter in a way. In other words, it's the gear and implants you equip that's going to be what defines your stats, special abilities, and playstyle. Now that brings us to our next topic, neural implants. Like the gear, these implants consume energy from your rig, and to me, they also show the greatest promise for character customization and uniqueness. This is because implants serve a multitude of functions. You might think of them as like the rings from Dark Souls or blood gems from Bloodborne, but they also take on characteristics of consumable items as well. For example, some implants are a simple healing item with charges, just like an Estus flask. You can also implant multiple copies of the same augmentation, in essence giving your healing item more charges but taking up more implant and energy space. But implants do more than just heal you. They also can reduce the energy cost from performing executions, or simply show an enemy's health bar or display helpful hints around the environments, to many other things. Alright, since I briefly mentioned it, let's talk about the environments. In the slice of the Surge that I played, the environments were quite fantastic. It was highly detailed, the storytelling through surroundings was definitely present, it had a level of descent and verticality, certain areas were dungeon-like treks through pitch-black sewer systems, and overall it was very well designed. The quality of the stage design was best displayed how as you progress through sections of the world, hidden paths and shortcuts would lead back to the medbay, the safe room where you can level up your rig, change your loadout of implants, craft items, and upgrade equipment. Overall though, it felt very well designed with nooks and crannies for hidden items and secret pathways that felt like it did a lot with what was relatively a small amount of space. Alright, so let's back up a minute to when I had mentioned the medbay, and specifically how it's related to death and currency. The Surge uses scrap metal or tech as its experience point system and currency, sort of like souls from Dark Souls. You can acquire this scrap from defeating enemies, and scrap can then be used to level up your rig, or various components are needed to craft specific items, as well as more rare items to craft items to higher levels. And, just like in Souls, when you die, you have one chance to make it back to where you died to retrieve your scrap. Interestingly though, there's actually a time limit. If you don't collect your currency in the allotted time after death, it's gone forever. One last cool aspect to this currency system is that the more enemies you kill without visiting a medbay, the more of a bonus modifier that will be added, giving to a great sense of risk and reward. Alright, so moving on to the story, I will say that the story of the demo left much to be desired. The main character, Warren, wakes up in the middle of some corpse pile while automated robots are picking and probing at him. He gets up and wants to survive. That's it. There were a few audio logs here and there to fill in some backstory or give the world character, but for the most part, from my experience, the narrative was intentionally vague and had little to nothing to go on. Instead, the exposition was built up by the design and aesthetic of the world. As I'm sure you may have already noticed, the Surge has a very strong identity with an industrial sci-fi feeling. Hate graffiti and a neglected industrial complex paint a picture of a dystopian future where something horrible clearly has happened, and mindless humans walk around in a lobotomized fashion wearing equipment of what I can only imagine was once their day job. And apparently, you have no choice but to chop them to pieces. So let's do that. Let's talk about these enemies and the guys we're going to be chopping up to pieces. In the demo, there was really only a few, and for the most part they could be broke down into two categories: humanoid zombie guys and drones. For the human enemies, I'd have to say they were equivalent to the first armored hollows you might run into in Dark Souls. They're not really meant to be challenging. They telegraph their attacks for days, they overswing drastically and have long recovery times from their attacks, making it easy for you to jump in for your own attacks. But, just like in any game like this, if you don't fight smart, even the weakest enemies can take you down, because these guys hit like a truck. There were also a few variations here and there of human enemies that were much more wild and aggressive, but for the most part, they felt very similar. Now, as for the drones, unlike the human enemies, they could shoot out an EMP, which would drain your energy and stamina, or shoot lasers from a distance. Overall though, they were dispatched pretty simply. The real star of the show here though is the Surge's boss and mini-boss encounters. The first mini-boss was some type of bulldozer, fire-spitting construction thing. It would spin in a circle and kill you instantly, while also shooting flames and smashing downward. The back legs could be crippled to stop it from spinning, but then a defensive ice mist would pour outward. It really had a lot going on for just a mini-boss, and it took me a handful of attempts to finally bring it down. The first main boss though, on the other hand, is some type of security robot mech. As it leapt into the battlefield and took aim, its main weapon backfired, causing it to resort to trying to smash me. Interestingly, it actually had two different health bars. It seemed one was some sort of threat assessment, and the other was actually its remaining health. But when attacked, its health bar did not deplete. It wasn't until the threat was maxed out that it started to shoot missiles at me, and after being hit a few times, I started to stay under the robot's belly as the missiles rained downward, causing it to strike itself and topple over, where I was then finally able to damage its health bar. Now, with the way targeting multiple locations on an enemy is such a big part of this surge, I can only imagine what form this will take with later enemies and bosses down the road. The surge definitely has me intrigued to see how the rest of the game will unfold, as I never was introduced to a skill called drones, which will give you various abilities, and I only saw half of the weapons. So I feel like there's a lot of really interesting things left to still be uncovered. Alright guys, that's about it for this video, which was made possible by a sponsorship from Focus Home Interactive. And before you go though, leave some feedback. What are your thoughts on the surge? What aspects look the most interesting, appealing, and innovative to you? What features do you hope to find in the final game, because the demo definitely kept a lot of secret? And last but not least, you can click on the screen now to be taken to a trailer for the Surge, and there's also a link in the description to order the game if the Surge is something that looks like it might be your thing. Alright guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.